All right. Go ahead and name the siblings from the Zacharys.
Zachary's were Joe P., Roy, Hardy, and Alice.
Okay. Out of all of grandma's siblings or Emmeline's kids, um, did all of them marry and have kids?
They all married except Hardy. Hardy didn't marry. He was the only one that I know of that didn't marry. But they didn't all have children. So Aunt Alice never had children. Roy never had children.
Mm-hmm.
And her or the other children, um,
It's Willie.
no, not Willie.
Is it Walter Fletcher?
Walter.
Walter
God,
Fletcher.
that's what I'm trying to think of. Well, Walter never had children.
How about Willie James Fletcher?
That's not one of her children.
That's not one of her children.
No.
Who was the other Fletcher? Because you named Grandma Lizzie. You said Walter. Was it Jimmy? Who was?
Well, wait a minute.
Name the three
James,
siblings.
James,
Mm-hmm.
Walter, and Lizzie with the
Okay,
Fletchers.
so on the picture we need to correct the picture because we have Willie James as one person.
Okay.
So James is the first name. James
Yes.
Fletcher. Okay. Thank you kindly. Um, what are the notable family traditions or customs passed down through our generations? Um, I noticed in quite a few pictures we had family members who owned barber shops.
Well, maybe that came from Lizzie's brother, uh, Uncle Fletcher,
Uncle Fletcher.
owned
Okay.
a barber shop.
Mm-hmm.
And so he in Philadelphia, he had a barber shop and he also had a hotel that he owned. And he had uh a club that he owned also. So he owned quite a few things there in
Okay.
Philadelphia.
So that's where the family gets the entrepreneurship from. Because I noticed that we have a lot of young people now at this junction in their lives who have their own entrepreneurial business, their
Yes.
LLC license.
Yeah, and
And
Juanita, had a beauty shop.
oh, Juanita had a beauty shop. Where was her beauty shop located?
It was over in the Ghent area.
In the Ghent area.
Yes.
Do you remember about where?
Um, where is that the main street that comes through there?
Colonia Avenue?
No. Um,
Collie? It may have changed. Not Princess Anne Road or something like that.
no, it's not Princess Anne Road. I'm
Okay.
trying to think of that street that runs through.
Okay. If you think about it, we can come back. If you
Yes,
remember.
okay.
Okay. So, how did the name Armstrong become a part of the family name, the Fletchers and the Zacharys? Because Grandma Lizzie was a Fletcher, and I know she's our grandmother, but she's my great grandmother, huh?
Yeah.
So how did that become the Armstrongs become a part?
Well, listen, she married John Armstrong,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how we became Armstrongs.
Okay.
So Lizzie Armstrong had several children,
Uh-huh.
and among those were my mother, which
And
was Elizabeth.
mm-hmm.
She had Uncle Herman.
Mm-hmm.
She had George Armstrong, which was her son, and she had Lorraine. So
Okay.
she had four children.
So were her four children born here in Virginia or were they all born in North Carolina? How did the family come from North Carolina to Virginia?
Where she had children, Uncle Herman, Uncle George, and Uncle Lorraine, and my mother. All four of her children were born in North Carolina, and she migrated. She and my grandfather, not my uncle, my grandfather John,
Mm-hmm.
migrated here. And when they migrated, they left the three boys in North Carolina.
Get out of
So,
here.
yes,
And who did my great uncle stay with when he migrated?
they stayed with Lizzie's brother. So
Which brother?
uh huh,
Which one?
that was James Fletcher.
Oh, Okay.
So they stayed with James Fletcher.
Mhm.
And Mama, uh, my grandmother, Lizzie, brought her daughter and took her daughter to Philadelphia.
Okay. What was
And
her
that's
daughter's
where
name again? What was my grandmother's name again?
Mary Elizabeth, I'm sorry,
That's your grandmother. My
that's right,
grandmother's name is
Elizabeth
Elizabeth.
A. Johnson. And so Elizabeth was raised in Philadelphia and went to school in Philadelphia. So Aunt Alice, Mama's, Lizzie's,
That's fine. That's fine to say her nickname.
okay, Mama's sister raised my mother.
Oh, okay.
And so when she turned 18, and she came back to North, and then she would come back, I think, every summer,
Mhm.
because one of the stories that I heard from my mother was that her father, John, always said, "You look like you're losing weight,"
Uh huh.
and she would, say, "Dad, I'm not losing any weight." Well, that's the way he perceived it
But she
because,
wasn't.
yeah, so she came home every summer
Okay.
back to Virginia, but he
Okay.
perceived that she was losing weight when she came home.
Okay. What did y'all used to call Grandpa John?
Well, I never really knew him. I was one of the younger ones. Dorothy and
Mhm.
I were one, but your dad, Thomas, Milford, Pumpkin, Juanita, um, and I'm not sure about Gloria,
Okay.
but they kind of knew Grandpa John more so than I. And I would say Pumpkin, Milford, and Thomas because every Sunday he would give them money for the movie theater.
Okay.
So they
Okay.
got money from him every week to go to the movie theater the following week. They
Oh,
could go to the movie
okay.
theater.
Sounds interesting. Now, how often did y'all go back and visit the Fletchers, family members, the Fletchers and the Zacharys that were still in North Carolina?
We went back quite often,
Mhm.
and especially during the holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, or every year in September they would have um, a church thing.
Mhm.
I can't think of what they called it, but anyway, it was a thing
Was
where
it revival?
it was like a revival
Okay.
where they would bring but it wasn't called a revival. I forget
Mhm.
the actual name, but Dorothy may remember. But anyway, we would go back every year for that, and
Okay.
that would be sometime in September.
Now, out of Grandma Lizzie's siblings, who else had kids?
Shirley's dad had
Okay.
children. Sure, he
And
had one child,
Shirley's
Shirley.
dad's name
Joe.
is Joe, so he had one daughter.
Yes, he had one
Okay.
daughter, and Uncle James. Uncle James had several children. He had Gladys. He
Mhm.
had Jimmy. He had Will,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to think. I think that's. Oh, he had. Uh, I think of Gladys's sister's name. God darn it. Ah,
We'll get somebody to share once
okay,
they
all
can
right. I can't think of
fill in
her
the
name.
blanks for you because I
Yeah,
understand.
absolutely.
So
I
I
can't think of her
understand.
first name,
Okay. And
but I
so,
knew her. I mean, I known
mhm.
her, but I can't think of her first
Okay.
name.
So, and all of them had kids as well.
No,
No, all of grandmothers. The one brother that had didn't have all his kids didn't have kids.
exactly,
Okay. Okay.
exactly.
All right.
So Gladys
Mhm.
had two.
Mhm.
That's Donald and Deborah.
Okay.
Jimmy is his. Will is his other child.
Mhm.
Will had, I think, 12 or 13 children.
Okay.
He, started off having one, set of children. Then he started again and had another set. So, but you'll have to ask
Jean, was it going to be
Jean.
Jean?
Uh
Okay,
huh.
we will do that
Yeah, she
on
will tell.
Friday. We'll see if we can't get her to share some information as
Yes, she
well
would.
to bridge in those pieces
Yes, she'll
for
tell
us.
you how
Okay.
many children her dad had,
Okay.
and his wife was named Gladys.
Okay.
Okay.
So we had
And
two Gladyses in the family.
yes,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Interesting to know. Interesting to
yeah.
know.
So, but anyway, and uh, what I say, Jimmy had two daughters.
Okay.
I mean, Jimmy had three children. He had two
Okay.
girls and he had a son.
Okay.
And so he had children.
Okay.
And I
And
think
I
that
know
was
you
it.
said Aunt Alice didn't have kids, but didn't uh
Uncle Carol.
Uncle Carl had kids,
He
correct?
had one
One
son.
son. And I
Yes.
seen pictures of him um where she took care of him.
Yes, she took
Okay.
and raised that kid.
Okay, so
So
that was just like her child. She may not have
yeah,
given birth to him, but he was a part of her because
absolutely.
she
He was a
cared
part
for
of
him.
the family.
Hmm.
So she raised that child.
And that
Yes.
seems like that's something common in our family too.
Yes.
That we once you are a part, you become a part of us.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
cool to know.
Yes.
On Friday, we'll group again with whoever's at the cookout
Uh,
to fill in some more stuff and to ask more questions so you guys can share. But I'm going to move on along. Can you tell me about the family's church?
the family's church, we grew up as
I know it's Oak Hill.
Oak Hill,
Is it
a
a
African Methodist Episcopal
church? I think
church.
because I don't think the Zion was on it,
I don't
right?
think so
I don't
either.
think so
I'm
either.
trying to remember, but I think African
Methodist
American
Episcopal,
Methodist.
Methodist Episcopal,
No, what maybe it was
AME,
AME. Okay,
African Methodist
AME
of Episcopal.
Church.
Okay, and what else do you know about that church from papers that I've seen? Correct me if I'm wrong. Our family was on that board that started that church. The history
Yes,
behind that church is
yes,
quite interesting.
yes.
Do you want
And
to
there
share?
is a history of the church, and it appears that uh, Uncle James and Gloria's grandfather,
Mr.
with
Johnnikins,
yeah, the
the
Johnikins.
Johnnikins. Okay, so that's how we got the Johnnikins. So okay.
Yeah. So they were the two that I know who I saw their name on the list, but they brought the property for the
Mm-hmm.
church. And then later they built the church on that ground.
Okay. Do you remember the year?
No, I don't
You don't
remember
remember
the
the
year.
year? Well, we do have the writing about the church.
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know if I'm correct, but it had something to do with 1855. The story is quite interesting. So we're going to advise everybody to once you get copies of stuff or look on the family web page, you'll be able to see these documents so they can read it for themselves.
Yes.
So let me see what else I got for you. Do we have family members who served in the military? And if so, do you know the branches of the military they possibly have served in?
Well, see, I don't remember all of the, but I know that Jimmy
Mm-hmm.
was in the military and he was in the army.
Okay.
And I do know that Uncle Herman was in the military. He was also in the army.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Uncle Lorene was in the military. He was also in the army. Um, excuse me. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Good.
And uh, your dad Thomas was in the military, and he too was also in the army.
Mm-hmm.
My husband Albert was in the Air Force. Trying to think. Henry and Mia's dad Henry was in the army.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Kevin, Lizette's brother,
Kevin
was
was
in the
in the
army.
army, absolutely.
Okay.
And a lot of this was a part of the Vietnam War that
Mm-hmm.
they were pulled into the military. So yeah, so Kevin and Thomas and Henry, they were all a part of that Vietnam War that was going on in the early 60s and the
Mm-hmm.
70s.
Okay.
Uncle
Which
Uncle
one?
Nelson was also, he wasn't directly, but he was Aunt Rosa, my aunt's husband, and he was also in the
Air Force.
Air Force.
And,
Uncle uh, Percy was in the Navy,
mm-hmm.
and he was married to Aunt Mary, my aunt.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to think who else did I know that was in the
Well, was
military.
Grandma Lizzie's husband ever in the military?
I don't think so.
Okay, when he moved the family here, correct? The
Yes,
Armstrongs
he
here.
did.
So when he moved the family here, what was his what was the purpose of moving here?
Well, they were all sharecroppers.
Okay,
And so that means they really never owned the land, but they
they cared.
sharecropped the land
Mm-hmm.
and whatever. And so a portion of whatever was given to them is where Uncle James and his family, he and Aunt Lucille,
Mm-hmm.
the house that they had probably was land that was given to them, and that house was placed on that land. And so uh, that was a part of being, when you sharecrop, meaning that you move from slavery into, you still are.
Stand on a part of the owner's land, but you're
Exactly.
caring for the land and you're giving him a profit.
Exactly.
You're giving him,
Yes, a
that's
part a
some good
part of
history.
whatever, yeah,
Good
what
history.
you grow, you
Hmm.
give back to
For
the
the use of
owner.
the land.
Yes.
Okay. Um, any other things you would like to share about the family?
Well, the only thing that I can remember that I find of importance is that uh, uh across the street from where Uncle James lived at, there were other Armstrongs
Hmm.
that lived over on the other side of the road behind the trees. And we found that out just as children, going to the local gas station, local store, kind
Hmm.
of like a 7-Eleven kind of thing. And when we were cutting through, there were family and children back there, and they were all Armstrongs.
Okay.
We didn't inquire about, if they were related to us,
Hmm.
but they kind of related that we're Armstrongs too,
Hmm. I remember one family reunion we were down in North Carolina, and there was a gentleman there
Uh-huh.
um, that talked to myself and my dad
Uh-huh.
and got pictures of us because we were Armstrong. Because he said he knew somewhere along the line we were all related.
Right,
Now,
exactly.
I'm just gonna go back just a little bit before we end our interview. What do you know about the Whitbeys?
I don't remember anything about the Whitbeys.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember in the history that I was looking at when I went back to look at some of the
Archives? Oh.
archives that they
Mm-hmm.
had, is that the Whitbeys adopted a child.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have children of their own,
Mm-hmm.
and from that child, she of course had children.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And I
so
remember us doing it long time ago.
yes,
And it was a Susan Riddick up. There was a list of names. So I can't wait till we share all of that, those documents
yes,
with the family so they can see and maybe get um, inquisitive about asking or looking up and researching
yes,
more of the history of the family to
yes.
understand it more.
And one of the things I do want you to remember is that when my grandfather, your great grandfather, when he and Lizzie left North Carolina and came to Norfolk,
Mm-hmm.
uh, one of the places that he found employment was the Longshoremen
Mm-hmm.
uh, Association. And at that time, I'm not sure that they were connected with the uh, longshoremen as we know them today, the ones that
Yes.
established themselves out of the big ports like New York and places like that. But as time went on, they did. They got together and they had their membership grow and whatever. But as one of the things that my grandfather did was that he brought his son, George Armstrong, he brought him on as a longshoreman. And one of the things that George Armstrong tried to do was to bring his children on, but the only person that went on board was my brother Thomas Armstrong, and he became a longshoreman. And then Thomas brought his son on board, who is Ahmad, and Ahmad is a longshoreman. And that was one of the jobs at the time that made good money,
And still does.
and it was an opportunity for black men in
Mm-hmm.
our area to make improvements in their lives. And like I said, my grandfather, because he worked the ships and things like that, at that time, one of the things that they had that was going on during that time was TB,
Uh-huh.
tuberculosis, and my grandfather developed tuberculosis. And so he never advanced, he never did all the things that I think that he wanted to do
Mm-hmm.
as far as his children and grandchildren, because he had TB and he died in 1955.
I see that on the when you go back to the burial, the cemetery, that history is listed in there of what people have passed away from.
Yes,
Because I remember going to do that research with you.
yes. And one of the
Excuse
things that
me.
we found out, I didn't know he had tuberculosis. I just know that he didn't stay in the house with us as children and or
Mm-hmm.
my grandmother, and I didn't know why. But people didn't talk during that time. They didn't tell
Correct.
children things anyway, and so I never knew. And maybe there were others that did, but I was
Mm-hmm.
not one of them.
And I
And
remember growing up, we all, because Uncle Teeny had it as well. So we ended up everybody that came in contact with Uncle Teeny, we all had to go get the shot and tested for it.
yes, tested for
So it's
tuberculosis.
important for our entire family to go get checked, especially Armstrong,
Yes.
um, to make sure. As for me, myself personally, because whatever it is that you carry, I can't go get tested. I have to go give. They have to do an X-ray
Okay.
for me
Okay.
when I have to be if I need to be tested for work. So
Okay.
just to let them know, no, she's clear.
Right.
So that's quite interesting.
Right.
Any other important details you would like to
Well,
share?
really, that was one of the things, and one of the things that I want folk to know is that John Armstrong was a very strong man and very
Mhm.
straightforward, and he
Mhm.
was a very structured man, and he was a man that didn't take a lot of whoop off of nobody. He didn't care whether you were white, black. He didn't care one way or the other, and he fought for his children,
Mhm.
and he cared about his wife.
That's
And so
different.
my thing is that um, when we talk about our children and some of us being very strong-willed
Mhm.
and whatever, a lot of that is because our grandfather John Armstrong was strong-willed.
It's embedded in us, huh?
Yes, and Lizzie was a caregiver.
She
She
was
took
because she
care of
cared for
everybody,
everybody, and
exactly,
that's
and
where we get that caring
she
nature
was a
from.
great cook.
Oh
And
yes,
I want
wrong
people to know
word.
that that lady could
Wrong word.
garden and cook any and everything.
Mhm.
So yes,
What some
yes.
of the what do you when you got well I think I may have asked you this when you guys traveled down to North Carolina,
hmm
what were some of the activities maybe that you and your cousins did when y'all were there other than going to the family church?
Well, the yard was a big thing because it was a farm area.
Oh, okay.
And so we would play in the yard and run and play. And Uncle James had his pigs. He had plenty of vegetables.
Go ahead, keep going.
We could go out in the garden, pick a watermelon, and
Mm-hmm.
we would bust it in the road, and that would be our serious. That would be our lunch. You know what I'm saying? We could eat that right there. As we cracked it open, we
You
could
sit right there and eat it.
stay right there and eat the watermelon.
Yeah, I can't wait to get all of you guys, as many of you guys I can together on Friday to share more information from your childhood.
Yes,
So
yes,
I greatly appreciate you answering the questions that you did.
yes.
And if anybody feels the need to fill in, they
Oh,
most
this thing
definitely
is
can.
stopped.
It's still doing. All righty. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Did you stop it or did it